Time to explain what was going on in that first visit. People would ask me in the tea break. Anyway, Amarachandra and friends, yes, the lineage of responsibility. So when Sangharakshita, our founder, began to speak of these lineages, first of all, it was in a question-answer session with the then members of the college. This is the body of public preceptors who conduct ordinations in Triratna. And he initially spoke of three lineages, the lineage of teachings, practices and inspiration. And then as he was speaking, he said, oh, well, and there's institutions, all the structures and institutions and systems, maybe this could be a lineage as well. And of course, all those structures and frameworks and institutions facilitate the sharing of, or they're the mediums through which those other lineages can be communicated to more and more people around the world. I mean, we're currently sitting in one of those structures or institutions. The Cambridge Buddhist Centre is an institution, as it were. This class is, from a certain point of view, a structure. And the decision and the team working out who is going to be on reception to greet people as they come through the door is, in a sense, an organisational matter. So all these things happen. They're not, sometimes people find them dirty words, but they're not dirty words. I mean, because the whole lot is created by people, for people, which is why this lineage got quite quickly, it morphed into being called the lineage of responsibility. Because it's people that take responsibility. These things don't happen without people. And well, really, I mean, if no one had been willing to take responsibility, Triratna wouldn't have grown very much since its inception. You know, when Sangharakshita founded the order, well, the movement first in 1967 and then the order in 1968. I mean, there's only so much that one individual can do. At the same time, one individual can have a vision which they can share with many people. And if those people kind of connect with that vision, then that individual with those other people can do a lot. And really that's what has happened with Triratna. Because in the early days, Sangharakshita did everything. I mean, he was the person who led the meditation, gave the Dharma talk, did the puja, laid out the meditation cushions, made the cups of tea, collected the dana, paid the bills. Well, of course, some of those things he began to share quite early on. But there are other things which he wasn't able to share for many, many years until the order had grown more in experience. So when I came along to a Triratna Centre in 1974, I was taught meditation by order members. It was order members who introduced me to the Sevenfold Puja. All the retreats that I went on were organised and led by order members. But Sangharakshita still led what were called study seminars. And all the Dharma talks were tape recordings of his talks. Order members didn't at that stage give their own Dharma talks. And that went on for several years. And yeah, the weightiest of all responsibilities, that of deciding on someone's readiness for ordination and conducting the ordinations, was Sangharakshita didn't begin to share or hand on those responsibilities until 1989, 1990. So although he began to share or pass on quite a number of responsibilities fairly early on, he took an active interest in what we were doing. It's not like he handed things on and said bye. He was very much there in the background, taking an interest. And for example, with the public centres, as more and more public centres, such as this one, developed, he would read all the minutes of all the council meetings. And he would make contact with someone at the centre if he noticed something in the minutes that gave him cause for concern. Maybe he spotted a wrong view or a bit of unclear thinking behind a decision. But his motivation for that was to do with his care and concern that the centres really were about benefiting people who were coming through the doors. So he wanted to ensure that we understood what was really involved in sharing the Dharma with other people. He'd also referenced new developments that were happening in a centre. I remember him talking about a centre that had developed a choir, and him expressing that he thought this was a very positive development. And then, very soon, numerous centres developed choirs. Or he'd talk about city centres that he'd really like to see Dharma centres being set up in, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world. And that would just sow seeds in our minds of what might be possible or where we could go. So he was an inspired Dharma teacher and spiritual friend, and we caught that inspiration. So it's true to say that the vast majority of people who were ordained during the first 2 decades of the Order's life, most of those people happily threw themselves into full-time involvement in creating the conditions which would support both their own and others' spiritual yearnings. We were invited, as it were, to help Sangharakshita create what he called a nucleus of a new society, a blueprint for a new world. And this was a society that was based on metta, on loving kindness. It was based on the 5 precepts of generosity and mutual respect, of honest communication, of respect of others, and of mindfulness of our states of mind. So as a disillusioned young person, which I was, seeking the meaning of life and not being at all interested in doing anything that was just focused entirely around material values, becoming involved in Triratna in the mid-70s was a very attractive option for me. And by the time I'd requested ordination in early 77, I had a sense that joining the order meant that pretty much anything could be asked of me. That actually felt quite scary, but I didn't feel that was a good enough reason to hold back. And in May of that year, Sangharakshita ordained me in a cottage not that far from here in Thetford Forest. I was 23 years old, and for the next 25 years I worked pretty much full-time in the movement in Triratna, and I held all manner of responsibilities, from organising retreats, leading study, teaching meditation, establishing communities, working in a team-based livelihood, being the first women's Mitch convener at the London Buddhist Centre. I also worked closely with another order member, and in those days you had an overall women's Mitch convener, which meant there were a couple of us who were actually taking an interest in how the Mitra system was developing across the whole world. And then for a time, myself and 2 other women in the order were also overall order conveners. So we were, again, looking to the needs of the women's wing of the order across the whole world and organising conventions and such like for everybody. So going back to this sense that I had in 77 that anything could be asked of me, I think I had a sense that in joining the order I was signing up for something collective, which wasn't just a group, and that we were just at the beginning of creating something quite new and different under the guidance and inspiration of Sangharakshita. We were working out between us what it meant to live a Dharma life in the West, in a Western society, in the last quarter of the 20th century. And at that time, we were endeavouring to create more supportive conditions for ourselves and other people to actually live a Dharma life, to really live a full-time spiritual life, as it were, not just something you did on a Sunday like going to church. So we were at the time, that manifested as creating single-sex communities, team-based livelihoods, and establishing public centres such as this that taught meditation and Buddhism. I'd graduated from university and got myself a well-paid job in Colindale Public Health Labs in London. But it came clear to me within a year that I wasn't really interested in taking more responsibility in my job. I mean, in particular, I wasn't willing, unlike my supervisor, I just wasn't willing to work outside shop hours, as it were, and do the extra work that meant I would further the research project I'd been given as part of my job. I felt much more inspired by the prospect of joining forces with these other young people at the Buddhist Centre and helping to create this new society, as it were, that language was in the air. So by the end of '76, I'd given up working at the lab for good. And as I recall it, my first small responsibility in Triratna was creating candles for a Christmas bazaar. This was a fundraising project, and there was a big fundraising drive to raise money to help convert this burnt-out fire station in Bethnal Green, which once that was actually achieved, I'm pretty sure it became the first city-based centre and community that Triratna actually owned. That was the London Buddhist Centre. So myself and another mitra called Joan, otherwise known as Padmavasini, were working away in the basement of the squat that I was living in to make these candles. And not surprisingly, we had different views on how to go about some of these tasks. And before long, we were calling on Dharma Dinner, who was a relatively experienced order member up the road, to come and help us sort out our communication difficulties. Fortunately, it was quite straightforward, and we soon got back into working effectively and created lots of lovely, colourful candles for this stall. But yeah, I mean, that is one of the things about working with other people, isn't it? I mean, we all work with other people, you know, whether it's in Triratna or not, I'm sure. And it's a great way to just learn more about how to get on with other people, how our way of thinking is different from other people's thinking, and navigating that territory really, and learning how to work in a way that one can actually achieve one's target or objective in as harmonious and creative a way as possible. And we can't know in advance what's going to be asked of us when we take on any given responsibility. I mean, we can have a jobs description, but that doesn't really tell us what's going to happen when we start embarking on that. So there's going to be joys and challenges, and that's why I think this particular lineage is so growthful, both in a human way and in a spiritual way. Not that this lineage is separate from those other lineages of teachings, practices and inspiration. They all feed into it. But yeah, I mean, through taking the various responsibilities I've done over the years, I've learnt more about myself and other people, and I've formed lasting friendships. So I've grown, and whilst also benefiting others. And this isn't particularly a surprise because, as we all know, I mean, part of growing into adulthood is having the willingness and capacity to be able to take responsibility, to begin to actually take on responsibilities where we're not number one all the time, where we're actually thinking of other people. And when we start working like that and engaging like that with other people, well, it's naturally growthful, because it's naturally growthful to go beyond our natural self-reference and to start getting other people more and more in view. I mean, for me, I felt fortunate that the work I did held such meaning, deeper meaning, because I suppose I'd got involved in the movement in a space when I was in the midst of an existential crisis. I was looking for something really radical, and that it seemed to be that's what the Dharma was offering, and there was all this work to be done to help create these contexts where people could learn and practice the Dharma more. So even cleaning the toilets, which I was required to do on a daily basis as the first caretaker of this newly opened London Buddhist Centre, even that felt meaningful, because it was taking place within the overarching aim of the centre, which was to introduce the Dharma to the inhabitants of Bethnal Green and beyond. And I seem to recall I put as much care into cleaning the toilets as cleaning the shrine. And well, I think that's what happens here at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. All centres have toilets, and I know they get cleaned here. And I'm sure they get cleaned as well as and with as much care as what I was doing way back in the 70s. So yes, I mean, it sort of takes on a deeper meaning, a deeper importance. So one responsibility I took quite early on showed up quite quickly some of my strengths and weaknesses. And that was spearheading the fundraising for Tara Loka, which is a women's retreat centre on the borders of Wales and North Shropshire. And I was on solitary retreat in Cornwall in 1981. And one day I found my mind turning to calculating how much money we were going to need to raise in order to buy a suitable property for a retreat centre, and how many years it might take us to raise that money. And I concluded that it would probably take us about 3 years. And I thought, well, by the time we've raised the money, with any luck, there might be some women order members who want to live there. So I came home to my community in Bethnal Green, Vajrachedika, which was down the road from the LBC, the London Buddhist Centre. And for several years, pretty much since very soon after my ordination, I'd been part of a council of women order members who'd planned retreats for women. And for a while, these retreats had taken place in a small rural property in Norfolk that we'd leased from a mitra. But the lease had lapsed, and we were now hiring venues for various retreats, and that had been happening for a few years. But we always had the intention that we wanted to purchase our own retreat centre, but we hadn't begun any fundraising, basically because we had come up against the challenge of trying to have sufficient women order members able to live at this small retreat centre we'd already had, because the women's wing of the order was very small. And so, we thought, well, there's no point really in starting getting another one until we've got more women in the order. Anyway, I'd been on that solitary and come to this decision we needed to get on with it, and maybe we would have some women to live there by the time we had the money. So I put the idea out, and people agreed. And then, of course, the question arose, well, who's going to do the fundraising? And there was a deadly silence. And then all the heads turned in my direction. And someone said, well, what about you, Sanghadevi? Will you do it? And, well, I think I probably gulped internally. And then I said yes. And then I said pretty quickly after that, but not for a year. I was the women's mitra convener at the LBC. It was going to take time to pass on that responsibility. I had other people, other things I was doing, and also I wanted time to try and find at least one other person to help me start the fundraising and somewhere to sort of have as a base. I mean, whether I really needed to postpone the whole thing for a year, I don't know, because the fact is that pretty soon after having said that, I began to realise I was absolutely terrified at the prospect of trying to raise £130,000, which doesn't sound like much money in today's term, but I can tell you £130,000 was a lot of money to try and raise at that time, when the Sangha itself was still very small, I mean worldwide, and we were all very poor. Certainly in Bethnal Green we were very poor. Anyway, as word got out that I was on this trajectory, a Dharmachari I knew approached me and asked me if we could go for a walk. And I said, all right, yeah. So we headed off on a walk to a local park. And after a short while, he turned to me and he told me he'd heard that I was on this trajectory to start this fundraising. And in the nicest possible way, he just said, well, and to be quite frank, I don't have any confidence in this project because I don't have any confidence in you being able to get fundraising. And well, to be honest, I didn't feel I could challenge him on that because I was pretty much untested in this area, as I was in pretty much everything actually. And then he explained that I came across as being quite reticent, and this wouldn't help me in asking people for money. But then he said that it was as egocentric to hold yourself back as it was to put yourself forward. And I found that quite interesting. I felt he was kind of suggesting, well, you could afford, for you, because you're so held back, you could afford to be what in your terms you'd regard as pushy, but actually it'll probably be you're just kind of coming out a bit more directly with, give me some money or whatever. Anyway, I mean, I couldn't help but agree with him that I was hardly going to be much good at fundraising if I held back from actually asking people to give money. At the same time, it wasn't clear to me that there was anybody else who was going to suddenly replace me if I decided to bail out. So I stuck with it, and for a whole year, every time I went to bed each night, I'd feel this fear rising up as I turned off the light. But by the next autumn, I'd handed on the Mitra convening. I'd found a Mitra to help me get started, and we'd set up a temporary office on the top floor of the community where I lived. Well, the Mitra turned out to be at least as unconfident as I was, and we basically spent a lot of time going in circles, but not quite. I'd say there was probably a little bit of progress made in the first few months, but not a lot. Anyway, fortunately, a couple of other Mitras got interested in helping, and these two women joined up with me to produce a much more effective fundraising team. Tessa commuted over from West London. She'd been involved in team-based right livelihood over there and was still living in a community. And Catherine was quite a forthright, sort of feisty northerner who moved down from Manchester and moved into the community with me. And in the end, all three of us became founder members of Tara Loka, with Tessa and Catherine going on to being ordained by Sangharakshita at Tara Loka in 1988 as Karunashri and Kulanandi. But back to us as a fundraising team, we decided to take ourselves seriously and create a decent working environment for ourselves. And we converted a basement room which conveniently had a street access. So it was the basement of the community I was living in, but it had separate access to the street. And we invested in desks and chairs and a filing cabinet and all that kind of thing. Because before that, I'd just been making do with this rather dilapidated old painters and decorators table, which I'd sort of lifted, as it were, from the street. I'd sort of found it out on a pavement one day and just brought it home. And I learnt that my strength lay in holding the overall vision of where we were heading, mapping out steps towards reaching it, and taking on discrete fundraising projects that, whilst undoubtedly stretching me, also drew on my strengths, particularly my strength in organising. And with a good team around me, I was able to be much more effective. And yeah, we realised that all three of us had different strengths, and by playing to those strengths, we were able to work as a team and gradually move towards our goal. And one of the fundraisers I did was a temporary 3-week Christmas shop right in central London, round the corner from Tottenham Court Road tube station. And that was quite successful, had a lot of footfall, and I was confident enough that it would be successful that I enjoyed myself splashing out on the Christmas tree, enjoying decorating it, putting it in the shop window. And we also made brochures that were about this prospective retreat centre, so that people who came in the shop knew what we were trying to do, which did actually stimulate quite a bit of interest from people. And at some stage during those 3 years while we were fundraising, it dawned on me that I actually benefited from going on retreats myself. I mean, it seemed a bit ironic. I mean, I hadn't really quite realised that before. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe I'd like to live at this place. And, well, that was fortunate, because there was still no other woman order members showing any sign of interest. And then, fortunately again, an older woman called Beryl, who lived in Norwich, who'd been working in one of the livelihoods up there, got ordained in '83 as Ratnashuri. And when she heard we were looking for people to help set up a retreat centre, she said, well, count me in. So basically, she and I and Tessa and Catherine became the founder members together. And I was the first chair at the centre, Tessa was the secretary and Catherine was the treasurer. And between us and Ratnashuri, we pretty much did that and a lot of other things between us. And unlike the fundraising, I didn't feel any fear about setting up the retreat centre, even though that was a huge project. I felt I'd already got quite a lot of experience of organising retreats, planning retreats. I'd been on quite a few retreats. I'd even led at least one retreat by then, maybe two. And I was pretty confident that women in the order would help us with the retreats, even if they weren't at this stage wanting or able to come and live there full time. Also, Sangharakshita was completely 100% supportive of us taking this step and, had been very keen on us taking this step. And that also felt very supportive. It's like we had his blessings, we had his active interest in what we were doing, and also his confidence that if we establish this retreat centre, then it would really help women begin to be ordained more quickly because they'd have the opportunity to go on more retreats. So we had that support, but also I realised later that when we first moved into this old farm at Cornhill, we didn't have a name for the place. But once the name Tara Loka had arisen in awareness, for me, Tara, this archetype of Tara, really supported the project and my own work in the project. I mean, Tara is this an archetype in female form of compassion. She's the quintessence of compassion. And she's active, as she's shown stepping into the world with one of her feet, but she's kind of got the other foot drawn up. So she's kind of has a balance between the inner and the outer. And she's giving the gift of the Dharma and open-handed generosity and fearlessness. And I really believed that our job was to bring this realm of Tara into this plane of existence. It was a bit like I had this sense that as if Tara Loka already existed, as it were, in a manner of speaking, on some other level. And we had to kind of learn how to bring that out in this world, on this plane, and live the truth of what Tara symbolised. I mean, I was a fairly blunt instrument in those days. I mean, I had this vision, but I was quite green and quite unaware, in a way, or a bit of a rough diamond in terms of my own, how I was. But the thing is, I was inspired, and everybody else as well got really inspired by this vision. And that's what really, I think, it got us going. And it's just built up a momentum ever since those early days. And I really do feel, when I go to Tara Loka, that is what has been and is being created at Tara Loka, and has been over these decades. Like, there's 4 decades worth of women's practice that's gone into that place. And all those women have been practicing within this myth of bringing Tara into the world, into this realm. And it really feels that it's a truly wonderful retreat centre environment that's been created, continues to be created. And for me, it stands out as one of the most positive experiences of community living I've had. And that's even with some of the interpersonal difficulties that arose between myself and 2 of my fellow founder members. Thanks to the strength of our Dharma practice, those difficulties were eventually surmounted. And even in the midst of them, we still managed to fulfill our respective responsibilities at Tara Loka, because we were so committed to the vision of what we were doing. So it's not always the case, but by any means, but where people do have a strong sense of the overriding bigger picture of why they're doing what they're doing, that can really help when you come up against the almost inevitable challenges of different outlooks, different conditioning, different habits, different way of looking at things. It really helps one to sort of go beyond that, or not let that become an obstacle to continuing to work out something together. So I'd been at Taraloka for quite a few years, and Sangharakshita, and I must have been feeling like I wasn't getting all my needs met, or something was going on, and I spoke to Sangharakshita. And he said he wasn't happy about people taking on significant responsibilities, such as in my case being a chair, and then finding after a few years they weren't getting their needs met and were thinking they were going to have to leave the situation. So he encouraged me to just really look, well, what did I need to help, to enable me to help continue those responsibilities. And for me, it turned out I made a decision that I wanted to move out from sharing a room with 2 other women. I enjoyed sharing this room with these 2 women, but I just felt like I wanted some space and some solitude in this very full-on working, living life. So basically I got a caravan, old caravan, wired it up and moved out into the back garden. And this was just the ticket. It meant I had a room to myself. I had my own shrine where I could create my own shrine and meditate there. I had a little office area, and later when I became a preceptor, some people got ordained in that shrine room. So related to this, I mean, Sangharakshita said in another context, but it's about the same, makes the same point. One has a duty to do that which enables one to do one's duty. And I've quoted this to so many people over the years. I think it's an incredibly helpful piece of advice. I mean, basically, we may be working for the benefit of others, but we also need to take into account our own needs. In particular, we need to take into account what needs we need to give attention to in order to continue to sustain those responsibilities where others are benefiting. Of course, sometimes, the pressure might be on, circumstances might be that they just, one really has to just give one's all for a period of time. But one can still be mindful of what those needs are, even if, for a few months or longer, one can't literally meet them in the way that ideally you'd like to, or ideally you need to. But the fact you remain aware of them can itself help. And in another situation, in Bhante, this was with presidents and public preceptors, where someone was saying to Bhante that they found it difficult to settle their mind in meditation because it was, they were getting so, so preoccupied with their responsibilities, thoughts about their responsibilities. And again, Bhante said, well, you just have to find a way to do this. Don't use your responsibilities as an excuse to be distracted in meditation. Now, I have to say, I was never consistently able to do that. I mean, I never mastered that, but I did do other things that supported me to keep up those responsibilities in an effective way. And one of them was regular solitary retreats. The other was certainly at that time at Taraloka, having that time living in the caravan, still part of the community. And later I realised that drawing and painting were ways that really nourished me at a deeper level. Also doing a lot of chanting and, nature itself, being in nature, in green, particularly green amongst trees was very soothing on my mind and helped me settle my mind. So it was whilst I was living at Taraloka that I and a couple of other women became preceptors. We were asked by Bhante to be preceptors. So again, I mean, we were a very unlikely combination. Myself, Srimala and Ratnashuri, the most unlikely combination of characters to have to try to work together. But again, there was something about we've been given this responsibility, somehow or other we were going to have to work well together. And we did, basically. We just did, despite huge differences in our characters and approaches and backgrounds. And yes, for a few years, until other preceptors emerged, we conducted all the ordinations of women except one person that Bhante ordained. So I'm going to have to leap on now to the end, I think. I was going to say a bit more here about that, but I won't. But I will just say that, doing ordinations is a very beautiful and privileged responsibility to take. I mean, to be the witness of another individual's commitment to the three jewels, it is a very privileged and beautiful responsibility. And you know, that point of ordination is the culmination for that person of often many, many years of Dharma practice, many, many years of ordination training. And to just see that coming to fruit, and to sort of witness that and support that into being is a really lovely thing. And being on the teams for the retreats where people are trained for ordination, and the ordination retreats themselves, again, they're quite special, those retreats, because they focus on the essentials of what it means to live a Dharma life. It's like again and again you're working the same ground, like what does it really mean to go for refuge? What is the Dharma really about? It's like you're cutting through to the essence again and again, clarifying and re-clarifying. What are we doing? What do we need to do? How do we practice? What does this look like? Because, you know, it's so easy in the midst of everyday life. It's so easy to get distracted, to lose sight of what is essential, what is most important. But those retreats are gifts for the mitras, but they're gifts for the people who lead them and support them, because, you know, that's what we're keeping on looking at ourselves, and it can't not have an effect on one. So just by way of concluding, just a reminder from where I started that the lineage of responsibility, it will stretch and challenge us, and it will also greatly benefit us. And it's the way we're learning what it means to really live a Dharma life and build Sangha. And that all these systems and structures, they're created by people for people. They're not set in stone. It is possible for them to change if that's really necessary. And it's also possible for new systems and structures to evolve where new needs arise that had not been there before. And a well-functioning system or structure will be perfumed by metta. It'll be perfumed by the 5 or the 10 precepts. It'll be perfumed by spiritual friendship. So speaking particularly to those of you who are here, who are perhaps somewhat newer in your involvement, engagement in the Dharma and learning the Dharma here at this centre, you know, I just want to say to you that, you know, if you see an opportunity here at this centre to contribute any of your skills and abilities, well, don't hold back. Offer them. Or ask a team member if there's something you can do to help. Or if someone actually asks you to help, well, do try to. If you feel able to, try to help. And if you hear of a need or opportunity at some further flung Triratna centre, or you hear of something and you just notice a little spark of interest or curiosity, well, follow it up. Find out more. Ask questions. Look into it. There may be something in that little spark which could lead you somewhere really beneficial, both for yourself and for other people. Because as the Buddha points out through the parable of the burning house, this world is on fire with greed, hatred and delusion. And most of the time we're distracted by the inessential and lose sight of what is essential. The Dharma is capable of liberating beings from the burning house. And Sangharakshita has given us all we need to make a difference. We've been given these 3 lineages of teachings, practices, inspiration and responsibility. So may we bring them alive in ourselves, with each other, between each other, and for one another, and with one another. Between us, may we play a part in showing more and more people a way beyond the burning house. Thank you.